Outdoor foot travel is the second phase of the orientation program for the blind at the Veterans Administration Hospital, Hines, Illinois. Having mastered the use of the long cane indoors, each patient begins this therapy within the hospital grounds. On his first day, McCabe became accustomed to the touch of his cane tip on rough cement, to his cane tip sticking in cracks in the sidewalk, in soft grass and dirt. Learning how to follow a curb was McCabe's first lesson. He was unable to maintain a straight course, often veering away. Or scuffing his feet along the edge. Approaching the thoroughfare bordering the hospital, McCabe heard the rising volume of traffic. Paralleling his own path with these traffic sounds, McCabe was able to keep a somewhat steady course. His first experience with the many oral aids existing outdoors in foot travel for the blind. McCabe could hear the traffic on First Avenue, but there was a car noise coming closer. It was hard to separate the two sounds. But Smigelski had taught him to get on the curb after first making sure the way was clear. The next day, McCabe learned how to follow a shoreline, tapping once on cement and once on grass. This helped to maintain direction, and by counting the sidewalks, he was able to locate the one leading into the blind section. On McCabe's fifth day of outdoor therapy, Smigelski familiarized him with the route to the administration building by tracing a map on the back of his hand. Along this route were blind patients in various stages of training. Dumas, his progress complicated by the absence of a will to improve. Stevens, doing fairly well. Danalian, making rapid progress. For to some, the mastery of foot travel comes more easily than to others. But for most, the struggle is hard in all of its aspects. Following a curb, crossing a street, finding an objective. McCabe had to master all of these to navigate the route. But on reaching the administration building, he went past the entrance. McCabe was quick to pick up the oral clues, the bus, voices, then footsteps on the stairway. Making a recovery, McCabe headed for his landmark. The rail going up the center of the stairway. The next day, McCabe had orientation in traveling by bus. Learning first how to enter a bus and tell the driver his destination. Then locating a seat. As McCabe overcame each of the tasks set before him, his confidence grew. He felt the tide of the struggle slowly changing in his favor. A few days later, on his last lesson within the hospital grounds, McCabe met a major setback. The course extending from the main gate back to the administration building included a number of hazards. A curved walk, sidewalks blending into the street, a tree in the middle of the sidewalk. Though McCabe had been familiarized with all of these problems, upon attempting to navigate this route, he wandered out into the street, unable to make a recovery. Later that afternoon, McCabe had to repeat the lesson. All went well till he came to the place where the sidewalk and street blended. Once again, he wandered into the street. All of the systematic identification of place painfully built up in McCabe's mind during the past month seemed now to have gone for naught. Anger with himself, with the world, arose within him.
Hey, Smeg, where am I? In the street?
Sure. You made the same mistake you did this morning.
If it's so easy, you take the cane and do it yourself.
The next morning, with a different orienter, McCabe attempted the course for the third time. Past the curved walk, he remembered the sidewalk blending into the street. All was well until he came to the tree.
Why didn't you help that man? You ought to be ashamed of yourself.
That night, the mood of frustration was still on McCabe.
I don't know. Maybe it was Morgan's fault. If Smigelski'd been there, it's Morgan's fault, McCabe. No, it was my fault. I didn't clear first. But why do they put the trees in the middle of the sidewalk?
Still have it in for that tree, huh, Charlie?
Yes. And lampposts on street corners and fire hydrants.
Sure, Charlie. I know. Why have sidewalks? Why not stop all traffic?
Well, that's an idea. Why not blindfold everybody and make it a world for the blind?
As the two men talked, McCabe was still unwilling to accept the reality of blindness in a constructive way, or believe this was possible for other blind people.
Tell the truth, Russ. Don't you ever want to let loose? I mean, really blast out at the world?
Often. But better save your energy, Charles. You'll need it.
At regular intervals, the Red Cross stages a dance for the blind patients. In a gay party mood, the men seem to forget their handicap. As for McCabe, this was his first Red Cross dance, his first opportunity since his blindness for companionship with a girl. As they danced, McCabe became aware of a feeling of revelation that the handicap of blindness is not an automatic bar against normal social relationships. McCabe reached the second level of his reorganization process. And so, struggling on, step by step, McCabe completed his 4th week in the blind section. His geographic world now included the hospital grounds as well as the interior of the hospital. He was ready to emerge from this friendly, protected area into the complex world of the sighted. McCabe spent the next 3 weeks in the residential area adjacent to the hospital. Following his familiarization, McCabe navigated his first square curve. To cross the street, he moved to the sidewalk edge furthest away from the intersection. With his foot half on pavement, half on grass, McCabe was able to take a direction. Picking up the opposite curb, he continued on, ever alert for unexpected problems. The next lesson in navigation was how to locate an intersecting sidewalk. To establish his whereabouts, McCabe continued on to the curve. There he made an about-face and retraced his steps until the beat of his cane tip found the crosswalk. Making a turn, he continued on. The next day, McCabe navigated his first traffic light crossing. Listening, he picked up the sounds of the 2 streams of traffic, one in the parallel street, the other in the street facing him. Studying these sounds, McCabe could determine the traffic light controlling each stream of traffic. After waiting out 3 or 4 light changes, McCabe found courage to head into the street. In these 3 weeks, McCabe became familiar with problem after problem in outdoor foot travel. More and more streets took their place in his expanding world. As he progressed through lesson after lesson. Meanwhile, McCabe was beginning to use a Braille writer. He was on book 2 of his Braille reading. In typing, he took his first speed test. In shop, he was making a lamp stand. And so, with the growth of McCabe's skills, he reached the 3rd level in his readjustment process. That blindness does not automatically mean a future of idleness. More and more, during these personal counseling sessions, McCabe began to think of the kind of work he would like to do. One morning, word spread that one of the patients had gone home.
Don't wait for Dumas. He went home last night.
One of the few instances when the blind program at this hospital fails. As the station wagon headed for town, McCabe was aware of the old feeling of uncertainty.
Smeg, how long before I go home?
Oh, won't be too long.
That day, McCabe's route included crossing a busy thoroughfare. Hearing the traffic sounds indicating he was nearing an intersection, he used the storefront as a guideline to the curb. On the first light change, he took off. Reaching the opposite curb, the lamp post served as a guide for the next crossing. Later that day, at the elevated crossing, in his 3 weeks in the outside world, McCabe had become aware of a special kind of feeling reserved for the blind. A combination of sympathy and admiration hardly extending to any other type of handicap. For 3 weeks in this business district, McCabe's lessons continued. Each day, a new objective. By now, his world was becoming one of oral and physical aids to navigation. Traffic sounds, guides or shorelines, direction takers, landmarks, all aids in foot travel he would be able to put to use upon his return to his own home surroundings. But meanwhile, in McCabe's mind, his fear of the future was taking shape. Was the armor the blind section had forged around McCabe strong enough to protect him on his return home? Was the victory worth the struggle? The next morning, his route crossed the L tracks. As was his custom, McCabe set his cane tip on the guardrail to indicate when the gate would ascend.
What's the trouble, Mac?
That bell.
Okay, let's take a break.
The next morning, when McCabe failed to appear at breakfast, Smigelski went to his room.
Come in.
Hi, Mac.
Oh, Smeg.
What's the trouble? I didn't see you at breakfast this morning.
I don't know. I just feel rotten.
Headache?
I don't know what it
Smigelski brought McCabe's case to the attention of the chief of the blind section and the physiatrist supervising and guiding its activities. Upon being examined, McCabe was found to be in good physical shape. McCabe still refused to continue his therapy. Instead, he was keeping to himself, remaining in his room. Until that afternoon, he had a visitor.
What seems to be the trouble here, Mac? I don't know, Russ, honestly. Maybe it was my headache that day, or maybe it was the bells.
No, Charlie. Since you won't tell me, I'll tell you. You're frightened. Plain frightened. The day's getting closer when you're to leave the hospital, and you're afraid. Afraid to go home. Now, isn't that the truth?
And so Williams brought McCabe face to face with the real issue. Did he or did he not want his independence?
Give up the long cane now, Charlie, and you'll surrender everything you've gained. Of course, you'll still have your compensation. That'll last. But don't bank forever on the generosity of your family and friends.
As the years go by for the blinded, the warmth and admiration of society inevitably fades. In time, McCabe would be a lone blind man, existing in a world that belonged to the sighted.
It's a decision which not only you, but every blinded veteran has to make, Charlie. Smigelski will be waiting for you at the regular place in the morning. If you don't show up, well, then we'll know. Good night.
Sure. You made the same mistake you did this morning.
Charles, am I going to have to wait on you hand and foot for the rest of your life?
McCabe saw himself again being led, taken from unknown place to unknown place, his identity lost in this lifetime interlocking of two people, one active, himself passive, and all the remainder of his life would be in this image. In the morning, the station wagon was ready to leave for town.
Let's go, Spig. We're late now.
McCabe's objective that day was a clothing store in the midst of the business district. From his starting point, he took a guideline to the curb. Then his direction. Children's voices identified a familiar landmark. Later, he heard the elevated, another landmark. McCabe knew he was traveling south because the L tracks run east and west. Turning so that the sun was on his face in early afternoon, he knew he was now traveling west. In the distance, he heard the traffic on Fifth Avenue, another landmark. From a store came the smell of baked goods, still another landmark. McCabe knew then his objective was directly across this main artery. After reaching the corner and by counting store entrances, McCabe finally reached his objective. a mile from his starting point. The next 2 weeks were spent in an even more densely populated business area. Amid swarms of shoppers, McCabe had learned to shorten his cane to avoid tripping up passers-by. By now, in place of his old feeling of resentment, McCabe had learned to accept graciously offers of help from the sighted. But once reaching the curb, McCabe knew he must no longer depend on the vision of the sighted. Instead, he must navigate on his own again. He had also learned how to navigate through revolving doors. And use escalators. McCabe's world continued to enlarge. He was now able to make purchases on his own, take extended bus trips, finally returning to the hospital. As McCabe reached the last leg of his struggle in mastering the long cane, his doubts about his ability to navigate had vanished. This was a new McCabe, strong in his belief in himself. A belief strong enough to let him face the last test for the blind traveler, navigating in downtown Chicago. The heart of Chicago is the district that takes its name from the loop of elevated railways that encircle it. This was the last lesson. Because of the confusion of sounds, McCabe was unable to distinguish the two traffic streams. However, the police whistle and accompanying crowd surge gave McCabe his cue to cross. Each day during the next week, McCabe returned to the loop, gaining experience in navigating in the midst of crowds and rush hour traffic. And so Charles McCabe came to the end of his 18-week orientation course. On his last afternoon, McCabe stopped by the office of the chief of the blind section.
I think you'll find it easier at home now, Charlie. The social service worker has been in contact with your family all along. They know now what you can do. Oh, one more thing, Charlie. When you get home, you may find people who discourage the use of the long cane, or you yourself may become lax. You'll have to watch that.
Oh, no. Not after what I've been through here, Russ. Miss Kane and I are going to be together for a long time.
This is Washington, Mr. McCabe. You're home now. May I help you?
Oh, no, thank you. I can make that.